Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 9th of January of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, details, interesting geolocations, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the United States of America, to be more precise about a very interesting piece of news we got from the Washington, and the news is about the Lloyd Austin, the Minister of Defense of United States of America. Lloyd Austin will be fired for misleading and withholding information from Congress and the White House about his health. He hid that he was fighting cancer, Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives Johnson. So you might say, what is the connection of the situation with Lloyd Austin? Of course, we wish him to recover as soon as possible, if it's possible, of course, and long living for him and so on. But you may ask, what is the connection of the health with Lloyd Austin and the situation in Ukraine? And I'll tell you and I'll explain to you everything. First of all, you need to understand, and you know, as I know, everybody knows that there are no NATO and officers on the territory of Ukraine. It's official position of NATO countries. It's official position of United States of America, and if someone visit Ukraine and something like this, of course it's like official trip, there is official documents for this and so on. But everybody knows that there are a lot of Western officers and NATO officers on the territory of Ukraine. At least the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported lots of times before that as a result of this or that strike of Kinzhal or Iskander or any other type of weapon, they managed to destroy another base, some basements or some barrack with NATO officers, that hundreds and thousands of NATO officers were killed as a result of another strike or something like this. We had this report a lot of time in the past from the Ministry of Defense. So how does it work? NATO says that there is no NATO officers. The Russians are saying that almost every month they manage to get this or that one. And important thing is not about the situation. We don't know who's lying, who's telling the truth. The most important is if somehow another NATO officer entered Ukraine and he was hit by the Russian missile, what happens next? And you might find very interesting that if this officer is located in Ukraine or anyone else unofficially, and if somehow he managed this or that Russian missile or anyone's missile managed to get him, there is a special group that start creating a legend. And for example, if this or that NATO officer died, then we may find another car accident, or let's say we may find another heart attack, or we might find another, let's say, accident somewhere on the holidays. As a result of this accident, this or that officer died or something like this. So anyway, the legend should be, you need to explain why this or that general of NATO army died in this or that circumstances. And so this is the situation. And now we're moving back to Lloyd Austin, because according to information we have, he disappeared from TVs on the 2nd of January. The 2nd of January, I'll remind you, is the day when the Russians ended their massive missile strikes over the entire Ukraine, including Kinzhal, Iskander, and many other different types of missiles like of Ha series and so on. And furthermore, I'll remind you that the Russians, according to their report, during those days managed to get another base, and at least, as I remember, one deputy of General Staff of Ukraine died as a result of another strike, and few, let's say, bases with officers, NATO officers, also were destroyed. So very likely, I'm not saying that this is like complete truth, that we got this information somewhere from reliable sources, or the Washington Post wrote about this. No, we don't have this, but everything, it's like a theory that very likely that Lloyd Austin during the, let's say, New Year holidays visited Ukraine, and it was an official visit. Maybe they wanted to discuss something with Zelensky without some official documents, and as a result of Russian missile strike, as a revenge for Belgrade bombings, when the Ukrainians were bombing Belgrade with cluster rounds, Lloyd Austin may be wounded, and he was transferred, of course, to United States of America. Maybe he's in a very poor condition because of his health, and this is the reason why he was already dismissed by the Congress, and very likely that he's going to have a lot of problems, and very likely we're not going to see Lloyd Austin anymore. once again, I hope that all these talks I just provided is just wishful thinkings or it's just a theory. And from the other side, we wish Lloyd Austin to recover as soon as possible. Now we are moving to the situation in Ukraine, but first we're going to start with Poland. We got very interesting video from Warsaw. On this, for example, video, you can see how the Ukrainian military authorities were giving summons to Ukrainians in Warsaw. It's a very interesting video. The question is, how does it possible that Ukrainian military authorities can capture, but he's not capturing, he's just collecting data? Because you know that the situation is that Zelensky adopted a law which doesn't allow Ukrainians abroad to change their passports abroad. So now if they want to change any official document, first they need to enter Ukraine. And we understand that if Ukrainian enter Ukraine, he doesn't have any possibilities to leave Ukraine. He will stay there and probably somewhere in Avdiivka or maybe in Sinkovka and Kupiansk direction. So that's why, while the law hasn't been adopted yet, because it should enter its legal power probably in a few weeks or even months, I don't know, now people are trying to get new documents. And there are lots of lines along the Ukrainian official centers in Europe, and people are trying to get new documents. And this opportunity took a decision the Ukrainian military authority to use, and they start giving summons to people around these Ukrainian centers all over the world. But anyway, this is a democratic way how to give summons. Of course, when talking about Ukraine itself, the situations there is much, much worse. For example, we got another scenes from Odessa. On this video, we can see how the Ukrainian military authorities blocked the entire road. They blocked the entire bus or maybe truck or maybe some vehicle with passengers. Basically, they blocked the whole traffic in this area, and they start getting mans out of this, let's say, transport vehicle and to check their documents. And probably as a result of this, I don't know, attack, democracy, another act of democracy, few more tank drivers of Challenger tanks or of pilots of F-16 would appear on the territory of the special military operation. The same story, another act of democracy we can find in Kharkiv. From this video, we see that another Ukrainian military authorities captured, block another car and start, let's say, I don't know, capturing another poor Ukrainian, and obviously very soon he will find himself somewhere in Avdiivka. Of course, there is a difference with the way with act of democracy in Warsaw, in Poland and Ukraine, but probably that case in Warsaw was the first case. Obviously, that was not the last one, and obviously the next months, if Ukrainians is going to get worse and worse on the ground, more and more people from Europe will be sent to Ukraine to stop the Russians or something like this. When talking about Kyiv and global updates, probably the most important thing is that currently there is a very interesting process taking its turn in Ukraine, and the thing is that lots of Ukrainian officers, according to information we have, started negotiation process with the NATO countries and European countries to get some guarantees. The situation is critical, and everybody understands that the situation is critical, and if Ukraine lose the war, obviously the current officers of Ukraine will not be able to stay in Ukraine because all of them will be captured and they will get into prison. Obviously, they need to have some guarantees. If everything goes bad, they will get job, let's say, in Czech army or France army or English army, United States army. So they're trying to make some negotiations and probably to get some guarantees or for future contracts with NATO. Furthermore, even if Ukrainians, let's say, can win this war, obviously a lot of soldiers will return back home, those who were sent to the meat attacks, to meat storms and so on. Because when talking about the mobilization process, as we discussed, this is the 10th mobilization wave in Ukraine. And the main reason why there are going to be 10 mobilizations wave for Ukraine is these officers. This is their responsibilities. They sent people to meet storms. They didn't prepare the operation, this or the preparation well. And this is their main fault. And of course, people will return back and they will ask their officers the questions. What did you do? And how were you planning this or that operation when half of the squad or platoon was killed as a result of Russian fire? So that's why they just want to save their lives and they try to find a way. But this is another evidence that even officers in Ukraine understand that situation is bad and they need to find a solution to how to secure themselves in future and how to have 100% guarantees that they can leave Ukraine if everything will go completely bad. And now we're moving to Kharkiv direction. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the borderlands with Ukraine. For example, on this video we can see the use of FAB 250. As a result of strikes, another ammo depot and warehouse were destroyed. And this is not the only video of fabbing along the border. Another video we got from the city by the name of Volchansk. But on this sense we can see already the results of another strike. So the Russians are very focused. Of course, some people may say that this is something like artillery preparation before possible next Russian offensive operation in Kharkiv. And as we know, even MI6 reported recently that the Russians have some plan to start offensive operation on the 15th of January. So all these strikes fits to this theory completely. But from the other side, we know that the Ukrainians use these borderlands like the cities like Volchansk, like Gluboka, like Kazachie Lahiri, and many other cities along the border to attack Belgrade with multi-launch rocket systems and with cluster rounds. So from the other theory, the Russians are bombing these villages because they try to get Chech vampires and Ukrainian Alha multi-launch rocket system and just to destroy them. Now we are moving to Kupiansk direction. We haven't received anything from this area, no updates. Probably the Russians took a decision to regroup and to create maybe another plan, but for now they can't penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt and they can't enter Sinkovka. When talking about Lyman direction, we got a very interesting geolocated video. If you know, and if, as we discussed in the previous videos, most of the mappers have already updated this territory under Russian control. Most of the mappers, like pro-Western, pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, neutral, show this territory as the territory under Russian control. But today we got the video from the Russian side, how they managed to discover the movements of Ukrainian infantry along the forest, and then the Russians start bombing this territory, which confirms that either this territory in the gray zone or at least under Ukraine control. So this is like the geolocated confirmation that this situation on this salient is not so clear as it used to be, or at least according to different mappers. So for now we're gonna keep this area as is for more let's say geolocations to understand where exactly the Russians are moving and where exactly the Russian edge positions. Now we are moving to Bogdanovka, Bakhmut, Artyomovsk direction. We have lots of interesting updates from this territory. As we discussed in the previous video, the Ukrainians were bombing the Russians heavily with artillery forces exactly in the area between Orekhovo-Vasilievka, Grigorovka and Bogdanovka. The main purpose of those strikes with cluster rounds was just regular artillery shells to slow down the Russians and not to allow them to develop their offensive operation further inside of Bogdanovka. For these purposes, the Ukrainians were using artillery systems around these villages. One of those artillery systems was discovered by the Russians in the vicinity of Fedorovka Drugaya. The Ukrainians were using M777 howitzer, and as a result of Krasnopol struck with the accurate shell, that artillery system was destroyed. Furthermore, most of the mappers and very reliable sources reported that as a result of Russian attack, they managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of Bogdanovka and to establish control over this territory. For now, we are not going to change the color because due to absence of geolocations. Other Russian reliable sources reported that Ukrainians were forced to step back completely from the northeastern and central part of Bogdanovka, and currently the Ukrainians are trying to dig in deeper and to prepare the next defense belt along this line. So everything that located to the right of this yellow line is already in the gray zone, according to some pro-Russian sources. For now, we don't have any evidence at all of this progress, so that's why we will keep everything as is. The Russians continue storming process of Popovo Forest without any changes since the previous video. And the same story about Klishchiivka. The Russians are trying to storm and to enter the next stronghold to the north of 215.7 hill, but for now without any progress on the ground, just FPV drone strikes with the purpose to reduce as much as possible the Ukrainian forces on this direction. Now we are moving to Avdiivka area. We have some interesting updates from this territory, and the main updates are coming from the eastern part of the village of this stronghold. According to information we have, the Russians continue advancing along the Militsaysky residential area, Militsaysky Dacha, and as a result of Russian offensive operation, the Ukrainians were forced to step back and withdraw their positions further to the central part part of Avdiivka. And now the Ukrainians are trying to establish the next defense belt along this line. This is perfect defense belt because there is like very short, like let's say road that the Russians can use from the left and from the right side. This defense belt is protected with the water reservoirs and the lake. So that's why the Russians don't have a lot of possibilities to be flexible and mobile. But the Russians obviously don't need this. The thing that the Russians want to do is to get as deep as possible to the south along the water reservoirs to capture, establish control over these, let's say, duchies, and after that to establish control and to continue offensive operation on the deep eastern part of Avdiivka. So the main Russian target is this part to the south of Kupiansk and to the west of Krutaya Balka. But for this, first they need to secure the north and to cut as many as possible supply roads that goes to the eastern part of the stronghold. So like this one. So all these supply roads should be cut before the next attempts to attack the edge eastern positions. Also, we have geolocations from the south, probably for the third or 10th day in a row, or maybe 5th day in a row. The Russians are bombing the strongholds and Ukrainian positions around industrial area. Obviously, this is the signal. This is the artillery preparation before the next attempt to attack. And if we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of January, we're going to see the level of bombings, the levels of strike 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 geolocated strikes, just geolocated. Imagine yourself the number of real strikes on this area. Obviously, the Russians do have some certain plans. They have completed the regrouping. They started artillery preparation, and very soon they're going to start the ground operation. And once again, the main purpose of this attack, I think, is going to be as well to attack in direction to cut the eastern flank of Avdiivka stronghold. Now we are moving to South Donetsk Marinka direction. The Russians continued advancing in direction of Georgievka, and the situation for the Ukrainians develops not so good. We got another geolocated video how the Russians managed to discover or to track Ukrainian tank that left the fire position, and as a result of FPV drone strike, that tank was damaged and probably destroyed, and also not just tank but the crew of tank also was destroyed. And if we increase the numbers of updates, we're gonna see that that was not the first, that was probably maybe third or fourth tank in a row that was destroyed in this area. The Ukrainians tried to slow down the Russians as much as possible. They are mining this area. On these photos we can see the mine fields that the Ukrainians established along the road from Marinka to Georgievka. Furthermore, but the Russians continue pushing, and we have another geolocated video how the Russians started their clearing operation on the let's say southeastern part of Georgievka. Important thing that we need to understand about this city, about Georgievka stronghold. After the Russians managed to bypass, let's say, this red line, so as soon as the Russians captured, let's say, everything that located to the right from this red line, so it's like classical Marinka, it's like central Marinka, the Russians managed to bypass this territory, these streets along Ivano-Franka, and these streets probably for 2 weeks. So it took 2 weeks for the Russians to establish control over the territory that the Russians, when talking about the clashes for Marinka, the Russians were spent around 2 or 3 months. So to capture the same territory like this one, everything that to the left of the red line. When talking about Marinka, the Russians needed to spend up to 3 or 4 months. So we see that the Russians managed to speed up the process, the storming process. And the Russians really developed significant progress in Georgievka. They managed to bypass significant territories for a very short period of time. And we might have a lot of questions about this, whether the Russians found the key to this area, or maybe the Ukrainians are about to collapse and they don't have more defense belt in this area because they haven't prepared, and the Ukrainians didn't even realize that it's even possible to bypass Marinka. Maybe there are no more strongholds, maybe there are just buildings and nothing more, and the Russians understand this and they continue offensive operation. Another point to confirm my theory, let's say, tell us that the situation in Mykhailivka. For example, today the Ukrainian sources published the video of the clashes of Russian storming process that started on the 21st of December with a significant Russian convoys, columns of armored vehicles heading inside of Mykhailivka. And there are a few important things that you need to note. First of all, if we take a look at this video, we won't see Ukrainian artillery bombings. There are no mortar bombings. The Russian tanks are moving inside of Mykhailivka as if today is 24th of February of 2022, when the Russians just entered Ukraine and there were almost no resistance from the Ukrainian forces. The same picture. The Russians are moving. Of course, there are lots of armored vehicles that were destroyed during the previous attempts, but this attempt was made so easy, even not a single tank was damaged from the Russian side. They bypassed these fields and entered Mykhailivka on the 20th of December of 2023. Then we have videos from inside of Mykhailivka. Some tanks managed to enter the residential area. We have confirmation of the Russian presence inside of the farms and so on. Now we know that the Russians were forced to step back from these territories. We got some very interesting analysis, and the problem why and the reason why the Russians step back, withdraw their positions from Mykhailivka, is that as a result of TOS strikes, aviation strikes that took place, they've been taking place since the beginning of summer till today, the Russians haven't managed to destroy every single Ukrainian stronghold and fortification. And during that attack, they managed to discover every single Ukrainian point that was hidden to the Russians due to, let's say, not use of them. And now the Russians know everything, and they took a decision to step back. And now the Russians are trying to establish control and digging deeper, let's say in the distance of 2-3 kilometers from the village. And not just that, the Russians are planning within the next few months to completely have encircled Mykhailivka along this red line. Of course, for these purposes, they're going to need to make lots of things by attacking from Marinka to the south. But the thing is, once again, this situation of Mykhailivka completely connected with the situation in Marinka and Georgievka. And the thing is that while the Russians will try to bypass these lines, they will spend probably 2 or 3 months for this, maybe less, maybe months, or maybe months and a half. Don't know. While these processes don't need a lot of forces, just small squads and artillery, and that's it. The southern forces will try to repel Ukrainian attacks and not allow the Ukrainians to, let's say, to force the Russians to step back. But the main forces and the main operational reserves from Mykhailivka, the Russians will redeploy to Marinka, because they see that the Ukrainians have significant problems in this area, and probably if they redeploy forces from Mykhailivka to Georgievka, they may achieve significant results and they may break the Ukrainians back exactly in this area, and the collapse of Ukrainian front line can be started exactly from this territory. So this is one of the reasons why the Russians stopped Mykhailivka. Because if we compare Mykhailivka with Georgievka and Marinka, lots of differences. First of all, Mykhailivka is already reduced to ruins. This is another Marinka. This is another area where the Russians don't have even a simple foothold. They can create a stronghold at the digging deeper. Because after Mykhailivka, there are another city like Konstantinovka, and the same story as we see in Mykhailivka. But when talking about Georgievka, this city wasn't touched by the hand of war. There are a lot of completely fixed buildings that they don't need to, let's say, to repair or something like this. There are a lot of positions, and by attacking Georgievka, and if the Russians are able to support the same speed, and if they can be the same fast as they now, and even to increase their speed in this direction due to reserves redeployed from Mykhailivka, within the next 2 months they can get even Kurakhova with the same tempo. So this is the reason of the situation in this area. We will follow, and obviously we're going to receive more updates. When talking about Zaporizhzhia area, we don't have any changes since the previous video. Only things that the Russians managed to improve their positions to the south, to the west of Verbova. We'll update this map, and we got another video, geolocated video from the village city by the name of Orekhov, another ghost town. More buildings destroyed as a result of FAB strikes, and lots of destroyed vehicles on the streets. Completely empty city, just few, maybe very small amount of population, of civilians. Situation is very difficult, and another ghost town as Avdiivka, as Bakhmut, as Chasiv Yar probably in the future. Now we are moving to Krynky. We have a lot of updates, and today we got another geolocation how the Russians made another attempt to storm the village. Probably this attack was more or less effective. The Russians were using not just infantry but significant number of armored vehicles. This video was published by the Ukrainian sources. I counted up to 5 or 6 armored vehicles, including personnel, carriers and tanks, and the Russians managed to land. As you can see, according to geolocation, the Russians, according to some episodes of that video, managed to enter this territory. So inside of the territory that, according to most of the mappers, was or is under Ukraine control. So we will adjust the map. That was another attempt from the Russian side. For now, we don't have any updates, results of that attack, but probably the Russians managed to shorten the Ukraine foothold in this area. So we'll see what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.